It ain't the left side or the right side, then it must be the FinSide. It ain't the left side.
Thank you, Solo D. Welcome to another episode of On the FinSide here with Kat and Paul. Follow us on Facebook, Twitter, Spreaker, iTunes, YouTube, iHeartRadio, and Spotify. I'm Brian Cat NFL. Paul is fanatic_pick on Twitter. We are trudging slowly toward the end of the year. 2 games left. The 3-11 Miami Dolphins take on the 1-13 Cincinnati Bengals. Combined win of 4 games between both of them, with major NFL draft implications here, Paul. Former Dolphins quarterback coach and son-in-law of Mike Sherman, Zach Taylor, coaching the Cincinnati Bengals. Obviously not off to a great start here with them. But, taking a look here, Paul, in terms of draft position, and here's how it really lays out, is if the Dolphins lose their last 2 games, they're going to be 3-13, and the lowest that they're going to pick in the draft is 3rd, and there's a decent possibility they pick 1st or 2nd. If they win this game, the lowest they're going to pick in the draft is 5th, because they're going to be 4-12, and if a miracle happens and oceans move and hell freezes over and the Dolphins win the final week 2 against the Patriots and go 5-11, the lowest they're going to pick is 8th. So a lot of different draft possibilities right here. We talked to Rebecca Toback about the Bengals and whether or not she wanted them to win, and her answer was a very firm, no, I don't, because she wants the number 1 pick, wants the Bengals to take Joe Burrow. A lot out there. So what's your feeling heading into this game?
Look, you need to tell Rebecca to leave my guy Joe alone. I would love to see Big Reds.
You might as well put Joe Burrow out of your mind. I'm saying, yeah.
Honestly, it's if Miami loses this week, and Cincinnati goes on to win next week, Miami goes on to lose to the Patriots next week, who, by all accounts, will probably have something to play for. Miami's at number 1.
Yep. Yeah.
It's as simple as that. And we don't have to worry about any trade down scenarios or trade up scenarios or what have you. The only way they don't end up with Joe Burrow if they get number 1 pick is if for some reason the front office either doesn't like him or by some accounts is absolutely enamored with Josh Rosen for next year and wants to go Chase Young. It's as simple as that. So, we can say put Burrow out of your mind, but in all honesty, there's a firm possibility if Miami ends up with the number 1, which is still a decent possibility at this point. The Cleveland Browns are an absolute dumpster fire for the Bengals to face off in week 17. And on top of that, they're a dumpster fire that's facing off against a pretty decent defense in the Bengals. It's just the offense that's horrific. And then you look at, there are also other outside possibilities for Miami to end up with Burrow. Cincinnati has not shown that they have a great front office. They have not shown that they have a plan. They have not shown, and Zach Taylor, if Zach Taylor walks into the GM's office and absolutely pounds the table for Chase Young, they're going to have even more issues there as far as that goes if they don't take the guy that the coach absolutely 100% wants at number 1 overall and may coach in the Senior Bowl, depending on if they have the number 1 pick overall. Miami could end up coaching the Senior Bowl.
You nailed right there why it's important for the Dolphins to lose this game. I mean, because we can assume that they're going to lose next week to the Patriots. So they play at New England. You have to think New England's going to be favored by more than 2 touchdowns. They're going to be playing for a division title if they lose to the Bills here today. I don't know if they will, but they'll also likely be playing for that number 2 spot in the AFC, because you've got to think the Chiefs and the Patriots are vying for that behind the Ravens heading into Week 17. But the reason I say that too is if the Dolphins lose this game, they lose to New England in Week 17, they're going to pick no lower than 3rd. But you also look at the other 2. If the Giants play at Washington, this week in Week 16, and then they play at home against the Philadelphia Eagles in Week 17, a very winnable game too. And in Week 17, the Bengals play at home against the Browns, and you got to think the Browns will probably be a 3 or 4 point favorite in that. But between those 3 games, if the Dolphins lose their final 2, you've got if the Giants win one or the Bengals win one, the Dolphins are picking first or second. And I think that's the honey hole there. I think that's where you need to be, because I'm fine with either Joe Burrow or Chase Young with the first or the second pick.
I am too. And on top of what you just outlined, we basically have to root for any NFC East team to win any game not against an NFC East team in the final 2 weeks. Because the very first tiebreaker as far as draft positioning goes is strength of schedule. So if Dallas goes out and wins a game against a non-AFC East team, that's almost like 2 wins that count for the strength of schedule for the Giants, for the Redskins, and keeps sliding them further back as far as the strength of schedule goes and as far as their head-to-head with Miami for that early pick. So there's a lot of goofy little fun, weird things to how it works out right now. And let's face it, in 8 days, we're going to know 100% certainty where Miami is picking in this NFL draft.
Oh man,
completely.
I cannot wait.
In 8
days.
It
has been such a long time coming here. And the final thing here, Paul, about the draft positioning is that it's really important too that the Kansas City Chiefs win on Sunday night, because if they don't, then the Patriots could head into Week 17 against the Dolphins and completely play their backups. And if that happens, the Dolphins would have a realistic shot of winning that game. I still think the Patriots would be favored, probably still win, but man, that would be a final dagger from the Patriots to the Dolphins, where, okay, now instead of picking second or third, you're picking fourth or fifth, and you don't end up getting Joe Burrow or don't end up getting Chase Young.
completely. And for one, the Chiefs are playing the Bears, and don't let their 7-7 record fool you. The Bears are who we thought they were, to quote Denny Green. On top of that, I do have to say this, because I know we've talked at length about this, not just on the show, but as a fan base. Do you want the Dolphins to win? Do you want the Dolphins to lose? I'm going to tell you right now, my heart absolutely wants the Dolphins to win. That will never, ever change as far as my heart goes. But I've got that argument going on right now where, my heart and my head want 2 absolutely different things here, where my head wants Miami to lose and get that number 1 pick, get Joe Burrow, re-energize the franchise, rebuild the trenches in free agency so they can absolutely destroy things in the NFL draft. But my heart, they want Miami to end up with those 5 wins. Every win's important to me. So it's a tough one. This is one where, win or lose, there are reasons to be happy, to be excited, and to look ahead to the off season with a positive vibe that we haven't been able to in a long time. Look at a team like the Bengals. Look at a team like the Giants. Look at a team like the Redskins. They're looking ahead to the off season with we have no plan here other than the basic. We're going to draft guys and sign guys and see what happens. Yeah,
that's exactly right. That's exactly right. And I will tell you this: I'm not going to mince words. I do not give a shit about winning this game. I don't, because look, when we talked a couple weeks ago, when after the Dolphins beat the Eagles, I looked at the rest of the schedule and thought, okay, well, if they go on a run here and they take down the Jets, they take down the Giants, they take down the Bengals, the Patriots rest their and they finish 7-9, I'd be like, okay, that's something that maybe I can hang my hat on. Where, gosh, they would be the talk of the offseason. Brian Flores would get Coaching of the Year votes. That would be a little bit different. But now here we are at 3-11. The difference between 3-13 at the end of the year and 4-12 does not mean anything to me. The only thing that it means if they win 4 games is that they have a lower draft spot. So there's not a whole heck of a lot of meaning here for me because, and I look at the rest of the roster and I'm pretty much squared away on how I feel about just about all these players heading into the offseason too. And having said that, we talked last week about a handful of players too that we wanted to step up. We actually picked 3 players that for the end of the year we thought it was important that they step up, and we'll get into that. So you went with Patrick Laird, Isaiah Ford, and Charles Harris, and those are 3 great selections there. I went with Keaton Sutherland, Durham Smythe, and Adrian Colbert. So this is interesting because Charles Harris was inactive because of his inability to play special teams. I was very disappointed by that because I thought Harris has been playing a little bit better. And on my end, Keaton Sutherland didn't play. It wasn't active. They activated Evan Brown instead. But taking a look at the remaining players, Isaiah Ford does get on the field, catches 3 passes for 21 yards, gets 31 snaps, at least gets into the rotation, so good for him on that. Patrick Laird continues to show that he's a good special teamer, a good role player, can catch the ball out of the backfield. And Durham Smythe, actually a very good day blocking. In fact, for any of our PFF fans, he actually got the highest grade by far on the team for his blocking role. I also think he'll be here next year because of his ability to play special teams. I was a little disappointed with safety Adrian Colbert last week. He had 2 or 3 really good games in a row for the Dolphins, but not really a good one last week. And actually, in one of the biggest plays of the game, when Damari Scott, the Giants kick returner, returned the safety kick back to the Dolphins 40, that set them up to go up by 2 scores. So, looking at the rest of the roster, though, Paul, you've got some players that are going to get an opportunity to get on the field this week, make a name for themselves. They signed some cornerbacks last week. They've signed a lot of players over the last few weeks. So who are you looking to step up here in Week 16 and Week 17?
One of the guys I'm looking at is Evan Brown that you just mentioned. I liked a little bit of what I saw from him last week, and Miami has to have some depth for that offensive line come out of this season. I know there's a couple of guys we've outlined previously. I want to see if he can be one of those guys. After Evan, as much as I thought I was done with Albert Wilson a couple of weeks ago, the little bit of spark that we've seen out of him thus far, I really want to see if this guy can be somebody that's here and part of this rotation next year at wide receiver. On defense, given the fact that Rake McMillan went on IR, I want to see Jerome Baker take that next step, next level. I know he's played well at times this year, but I want to see him evolve into that linebacker. So we know we've got at least one true linebacker next year that's starting. Because we don't know that right now across the linebacker core. Rake McMillan, he's good against the run. There's probably a role for him. But we want that 3-down linebacker that's going to be out on the field, going to be playing the pass, going to be rushing the quarterback, and has all these tools that Baker has. So I really want to see that in his final game.
Yeah, and Jerome Baker, I think the last 2 weeks has played his 2 best games as a pro, and good for him on that. Raekwon McMillan overall had a very good season. He did go on injured reserve. And then behind him, a big opportunity for Sam Aguavion too, because he's second on the team in sacks with 3.5. He's under contract for next year, and the big telling thing with Aguavion there is he is 4th on the team in special team snaps, and that's meaningful because if you're playing that key special teams role like Aguavion is, like Durham Smythe is, like Patrick Laird is, then that really increases your odds that you're going to be here next year. And I think all 3 of those players will. So it's going to be fascinating to see what type of role they continue to evolve into. You mentioned Evan Brown, and that was the number 1 guy on my list that I am very interested in seeing. I hope last week against the Giants, the Dolphins basically rotated 3 guards inside. Michael Dieter played 53 snaps. Shaq Calhoun played 52. And then Evan Brown rotated with both of them and played 37. Without question, in my eyes, Evan Brown was the best player on the team there. And that's kind of disappointing because, I mean, you spent a third-round pick on Michael Dieter. We were happy to get Shaq Calhoun as an undrafted free agent. Then you pick up Evan Brown off the street, and he looks significantly better than both of them.
Oh, he does. And I'm very excited to see what he has. It's offensive line is one of those goofy positions where you can occasionally just hit on some unknown player that just fits perfectly into your scheme. And Evan Brown feels like that based on 1 week, but I need to see it a lot more consistently moving forward.
Yeah, that's for sure. And I just saw a lot more physical potential out of him. And my hope in this is that Evan Brown starts at left guard, Deion Calhoun starts at right guard. Calhoun has played very poorly the last couple of weeks, but I at least see the physical potential in him. So hopefully he's somebody that improves from 1 year, or year one to year two. And as far as Michael Dieter's concerned, he has backup versatility at center and guard. I think he's going to be in the mix for a starting job somewhere there. C.K. Parrott, Chris Kaufman, has said for a long time, he said this on their podcast too, that he might be a better fit at center because he's not as exposed to that bull rush. He's 6'5". He's got a very good reach. His future might be at center. I wonder if the Dolphins kick those tires here in the offseason. But Paul, taking a look at the rest of the team and how this matchup is with the Bengals, they put Andy Dalton back at quarterback a couple of weeks ago. I don't really understand the logic in that. They went with Ryan Finley for a couple of weeks, who was their fourth-round pick, and he didn't play well. But then they put Andy Dalton back. It's kind of what the Dolphins did with Fitzpatrick, except the Dolphins decided to do that earlier in the year. I mean, I think keeping Finley in there really would have cemented them having that number one overall pick. But they do have two other good players on offense. Joe Mixon has been on a tear the last 2 weeks. 146 yards last week, 136 the week before. He has 1,175 total yards for the season. Really one of the more talented running backs in the league. And also Tyler Boyd is 135 yards away from back-to-back 1,000-yard season. So, and that shows that, kind of like with the Giants last week, even though the Giants weren't a very good football team, as far as their skill positions, they were able to outmatch this decimated Dolphins back seven. And I think that might be the case again this week against the Bengals.
Yeah, the Bengals should be able to expose Miami's secondary. I do like Colbert. I do like Rowe. I do like what we've got the safety position. I like Nick Needham, even though he's shown a propensity for penalties. And the other side of the field is absolutely a dumpster fire corner right now, and it's not even close. So if Nick Needham is on Tyler Boyd, I expect to see a few of the penalties continue as he's learning the NFL and the way it's called. If Tyler Boyd's on the other side of the field, I do expect him to exploit some of the players that will be rotating at the other corner. Joe Mixon is the fly in the ointment for the Dolphins here. Joe should be able to run rampant against Miami's defense with Rake McMillan out. Brian Flores has called out the fact that Sam McGuavin should be the one that's stepping up defending the run. I've got news for you. He hasn't shown that skill set thus far this year. So I do expect Joe Mixon to have a little bit of a field day in this one. He's better than some of the running backs that have produced against Miami thus far. Mixon.
And as far as the run defense, it requires a lot of discipline to play well in this defense. And Sam McGuavin and Taco Charlton are two that if you look at big runs, they tend to happen over those two guys. The good thing is that McGuavin can play some special teams, and he can also get to the quarterback, more of an explosive type of player, but not a great down-to-down player. And the same goes for Taco Charlton there at that spot. But the offensive line, the Bengals, we might be seeing the two worst offensive lines in the NFL this year. I'm hoping Vince Beagle gets a couple more sacks throughout the rest of the year to springboard into next season, and he's going to have that opportunity. The Bengals got Cordy Glenn back a couple weeks ago. That made a big difference for them. But the rest of the offensive line is pretty weak for them, especially on the interior with guys like Trey Hopkins, rookie Michael Jordan and a few other players. So we're hoping the Dolphins are going to get some push there. We can pretty much expect what Davin Gotcha and Christian Wilkins are going to do from week to week, but the Dolphins are extremely soft along the edges, and I think Joe Mixon might have the opportunity to exploit that. On the offensive side of the ball for the Dolphins, Ryan Fitzpatrick is 210 yards away from a 3,000-yard season here, so we should expect him to get there by the end of the year. And the Bengals have some players out in the secondary. Dre Kirkpatrick is out for the year on injured reserve. B.W. Webb should be starting opposite William Jackson. And there could be some mismatches there in the secondary because you expect William Jackson to be on Devontae Parker. But even an Allen Hurns or an Albert Wilson might be able to get some yardage here against the rest of the Bengals secondary.
They should. The Bengals are decent on defense, as I outlined earlier. It's Andy Dalton, however, could put the Bengals defense, as he did last week, playing against a short field. It all depends on if we get the swan song of Eli Manning like we did last week out of Dalton, or if we get the Andy Dalton that showed up last week in this game. And in reality, that's going to be the biggest difference maker outside of Joe Mixon is if Andy Dalton continues to put the Bengals defense in a short field. I do expect Ryan Fitzpatrick to be able to take care of business with Devontae Parker, putting him over 1,000 yards, with Albert Wilson, with a little bit of Isaiah Ford, and I'm hoping we can see a little bit better stat line out of Mike Gesicki this week.
Yeah, he's been so tough on Gesicki the last week. I don't.
I have.
I'm not quite sure why. 4 catches, 47 yards the last week. And I thought he should have caught 8 passes the week before that, but Fitzpatrick missed him 7 times. I'm kind of exaggerating there, but Devontae Parker needs 46 yards for 1,000. Mike Gesicki needs 46 yards for 500. Those would be 2 very, very cool milestones to exceed in this game for 2 young players at those skill positions. Andy Dalton on the season, he has a lower completion percentage than Ryan Fitzpatrick. Fitzpatrick has 61.6. Dalton has 59.7. Dalton has fewer touchdowns with 11 and more interceptions with 13. So Ryan Fitzpatrick, believe it or not, has outplayed him this year, and I think this is the end here of Andy Dalton with the Bengals. But like with Eli Manning last year, that Dalton has won a lot of games with them. Maybe this is his final win with the Cincinnati Bengals. And if that happens, we're going to be on the edge of our seats next week because assuming the Dolphins go 3-13, losing to the Patriots next week, then you're going to have that we're going to be watching that Bengals-Browns game because that would move the Dolphins up into the first or second pick if the Bengals end up winning that game too. And that would be a very Cincinnati Bengals thing to do. So, Paul, what's your prediction for this game?
Ooh, heart and head, as I outlined earlier. I think Joe Mixon runs wild in this one, but unfortunately, I think Brian Flores continues to do what Brian Flores does, wins this game as he continues to set a record for number of players that have seen the field in the season, and Miami pulls this out 21-14.
I'm going to go 23-20 Bengals. I see Joe Mixon having his 3rd 100-yard game in a row. He's catching fire there, and I see Andy Dalton winning what will be his final game as a Cincinnati Bengal. And again, like I said earlier, I had a breakthrough last week with the Giants game where I was actually able to want the Dolphins to lose here toward the end of the year. I never do that. I've never been able to do that. But in this context, look, I don't want to, after all this, have the 7th or 8th pick in the draft. I want to have a top 3 pick. And if the Dolphins do lose this game, then it's very likely that they're not only going to have the 3rd pick, but it's very, very possible that they have the 1st or 2nd pick. And that's exactly where I want to be. So in 8 days, like you said, Paul, we're going to know where the Dolphins are picking in the NFL draft, and that will do it for our breakdown of the Miami Dolphins matchup with the Cincinnati Bengals. You can follow Paul and I on Twitter, Facebook, Spreaker, iTunes, YouTube, iHeartRadio, and Spotify. I'm Brian Cat NFL. Paul is Fanatic_Pick. And Paul and I are going to have a lot of exciting segments here on the NFL draft and on free agency as this concludes. And if it's not on the right side and it's not on the left side, it is on the fin side. So, Lodi, take us home.
It ain't the left side or the right side, then it must be the fin side. It ain't the left side or the right side, then it must be the fin side. Listen, Dolphins fans across the land all tuning in to see what Brian Cat